Welcome to the Outdoor View. This is the place where we educate, connect, and learn to protect our outdoor traditions. I'm your host for today, Bill Gaines, and I have the pleasure of having with me Gary Link. Gary, we're going to talk about a subject that I know pretty much nothing about today, which is a little unusual for these interviews. But among other things that you do, you are a whitewater rafting guide. And I live within 10 miles of one of the hottest whitewater rafting places, certainly in California, maybe nationwide. I don't know, but I don't know a single other rafting guide, which is funny. And I know several people that have rafted. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've never done whitewater rafting. So I'm really curious to learn a lot more about this. But you just touched on something that I'd like to dive into first. So what does it take? It's not like I can just say, hey, I want to be a whitewater rafting guide, and boom, tomorrow by lunch, I'm a whitewater rafting guide. I mean, obviously there's got to be some requirements and protocol that go into being licensed to do this. So let's start with that. What does it take to be a whitewater rafting guide?
It first takes willingness. It takes the ability for one to step outside of their comfort zone and try something that's just, like I said, well outside of your comfort zone. And most of the companies that are up in the South Fork of the American River Valley, most of the large companies in California kind of work from there. I think there's 12 to 14 rivers in California that are raftable commercially. Most of those companies will offer up kind of a training or a guide school, if you will. The company that I went through back in 1997, All Outdoors Whitewater Rafting, had a week-long guide school, and we came in and we learned how to be a guide. We learned how to watch out for unique things on the river. We learned how to cook meals, breakfast, lunches, and dinner out on the river. We learned how to set up camp games. We learned how to prepare and manage emergencies on the river through call signs that we use. We nonverbal call signs, because oftentimes the river's so loud you can't hear anything. You learn a lot of things like that. In addition to, as I mentioned, you have to be trained in first aid and CPR. They like you to be trained in swiftwater rescue. There's also wilderness training. I mean, there's just a bunch of different training opportunities that are out there. But I think it's mostly the insurance companies that provide lower insurance rates if your guides are trained professionally and have certain certifications.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that would make sense, because every day is different. I know that the flows change, so obstacles or what, even if you're rafting the same stretch of river every day for 4 months, I mean, it's going to be different every day for 4 months.
It's funny you mentioned that. When I first guided on the South Fork of the American River, the flow was roughly 2,000 cubic feet per second, CFS, up to 2,500 CFS. And it creates these unique water hydraulics with the large granite boulders that are in the river. When the river's wide, the river levels typically are a little not as deep, but when it narrows, oftentimes the river gets deeper, but also moves swifter. And when there's rock and boulders and other undulations in the way, the water pours over it, creates waterfalls, it creates hydraulics, it creates unique things that you can do in a raft or in a kayak. And it does a lot of pretty cool things. And it's funny, gosh, was it 97, 98 when we had the big floods? So as I mentioned, my first time rafting on the South Fork was at 2,500 CFS. We did a rafting trip that was like 11,000 CFS. And on the South Fork, if you put in at the upper section to the lower section down to Lake Folsom, it's roughly 21 miles of rafting. It would take, on a normal day, 8 to 9 hours to do that whole section. When we were rafting into that 10,000, 11,000 CFS, it took us, I want to say, maybe 2-3 hours. I mean, we were flying down that river. A lot of the rocks that we used to look up at, we were looking down at. Because the water levels vary, like you said, they go up and down, and it creates such different hydraulics and such a different river system.
Let me ask you this, because I want people that see this interview to be excited to go rafting, not to be afraid to go rafting, right? Because I know there's a lot of unknowns out there, but making the jump from, what'd you say, 2,500 to 11,000 CFS is like, I mean, you don't have to be a major in math to know that's like 4 times plus, right? I mean, so if you're getting ready to take somebody down the river and you know that the flows have gone way up or maybe way down, I mean, do people scout that river first so they know what they might see today that they didn't see yesterday, or perhaps maybe haven't seen all season? Or I mean, how do you know what's around the next curve when you've got some substantial changes on water conditions like that?
Let me preface this answer first by saying it's a good visualization for those who don't understand what a cubic foot per second kind of equals. Imagine a basketball. It's roughly a cubic foot. Now, if the flow is 2,000 CFS, imagine 2,000 basketballs all lined up going past you every second. That's literally 2,000, and that's what it is. And then 10,000, obviously, it goes much, much higher.
Right.
But it gives you kind of a visualization for how the impact of this water will put out. With regards to explaining things, if you've never rafted a river before, you should always scout whenever you have slack water, because typically before a rapid, you'll have slack water. Water slows down, it kind of backs up a little bit, and then when it gets to the rapid, it pours over and funnels down and moves quickly. So when I've gone rafting where I didn't know a river and I was out there without anyone who had done it before, we always eddied out upriver, and then we'd walk down to go look at the rapid so we could scout where we're going to go. Okay, there's a boulder over there. There's a hydraulic there that we don't want to go pour over that has a frown face. If you look down the river and you see a frowny face, it means if you go into it, that rapid could potentially keep your raft there or a person there if they fell out. Most rapids have a smiley face, which means you can flow through it and keep going. But as a commercial rafting guide, we know kind of how the river's going to run because I've ran the South Fork of the American River over 100 times, probably 150 times by now. And so I know where things are at certain flows at 1,500 CFS. I know where rapids are at 2,500 CFS or 3,500. You know how things change. And it's kind of like that repetition. Otherwise, you talk to somebody who has. But if anyone ever goes out on the river without a commercial guide, somebody who's trained on that river, I would do what you said exactly. Stop upriver and scout the rapid, because you never know what's going to be down there, whether there's going to be a log in the way or rebar from a previous mining operation that went out of whack 100 years ago, which there still are some things in the rivers from over 100 years ago. So commercial is my preferential way to go for those who know, or at least with a guide who has been rafting and has good experience.
It's the only way I would go. I'll tell you that right now. Now, the typical raft size, and I can see the picture behind you. How many people are typically, what do you take, like 6, 7, 8 people at a time? What's your normal raft size, if you will?
That one right there is 14 feet long. I want to say it's 8 feet wide, if memory serves. And it's self-bailing, which means that when water falls into the raft, there's holes all around the bottom that water flows out.
Nice. Okay.
So it keeps you up at the top of the water. I've been on rafts that were 18 feet long and 10 feet wide that were called bucket boats. They didn't have self-bailing. And we literally had a couple buckets in the raft with us. And we'd go through a rapid and fill up totally with water up to the top of the top little section, right there, that top little section right there. And water would fill up there, and we'd take buckets and scoop it out. Now the raft would stay up and nobody would fall out, but it was amazing how heavy that raft became when it was full of water.
I'm sure.
Bucket it out. So these self-bailing rafts are so much more amazing. I purchased one about, I want to say 10 years ago now, for my family and I, and we love being on the water. We just love being out there.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah. So if you're in a raft of like the size that you purchased, like the one behind you, how many guests will join you if you got a full boat for that rafting trip?
So the raft right there behind me, I think there's 5 people in that raft, 5 guests. That raft right there can fit 8 people total and be fairly comfortable. I wouldn't go more than 8, but 6 is probably good for that size raft. The most I put in a raft before was 12 people. But there's also rafts that are, a couple of 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. You can fit 3 people and you're lucky. So there's rafts of all types and sizes. The thing that matters most is the strength of the raft. If it's metallicized rubber, which was created by, I believe, Avon, a British company, back in the 50s and 60s for military uses. The Navy SEALs use the Avon rafts for their issues. But these rafts are phenomenal. I mean, you can skate by rocks that are razor sharp and almost has no effect. It's pretty incredible how powerful these rafts are. Strong.
Your typical trip, I would imagine you get a mixture of people that have probably raft several times a year, every year, and people that have never been there before.
Both. I've taken families down who come over from Europe and they wanted to try something. They thought it was American, so they tried whitewater rafting. I remember taking a group of French tourists, a mom and a dad and their two daughters down the river, and mom and dad were scared to death. It was very obvious, and we had conversations beforehand. They spoke good English. I spoke a little French, and we had good conversations. And just to watch the parents kind of evolve from frightened to death to me jumping in the river with their daughters and floating down the river. Their daughter, I didn't want to say the girls were 11 or 12, and we just had such a blast. And the daughters were just having so much fun on the river. And to see the parents at the end of the day just go from scared to death to so excited and smiles everywhere. It was a pretty incredible day. So it's awesome to see people kind of go from that transition of scared to death, because everybody's watched a movie of, Meryl Streep movie or some other movie where all these dangerous things happen. It's like, well, I mean, accidents and deaths do occur, but it's fairly rare. And it's usually external issues. Somebody has a heart attack because they just have bad health. But rafting is pretty safe. I mean, it's much safer than driving.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. So what's the season, Gary? Obviously, you're not going to do this in the dead of winter. I mean, what's the season?
Well, so with the company I work for, All Outdoors, they'll run trips all year round. Really? If there's water flowing, they will run a trip. That's pretty much it. The typical season most people raft is from May to August, just because it's warmer.
Right.
But with that, though, I've done rafting trips where I was having snowball fights going down the river. I did a trip on the North Fork of the Stanislaus River. Beautiful, beautiful river, flows through Calaveras Big Tree State Park. It's a short river, but it's got phenomenal geology, phenomenal hydrology, and it's just an amazing, amazing river with beautiful scenery all around it. You actually take out at the Calaveras Big Tree State Park, and we were having snowball fights going down the river because it was dumping snow. It was April. We were up there in April. We had an early season trip, and it was the weirdest thing to be wearing a full wetsuit. I didn't have a dry suit, which I wish I would have, but we're having snowball fights going down the river while going through big class 4 rapids. It's a fun you can't explain. It sounds crazy, but it was just amazing.
Well, my next question you just answered. It was like, you're not going to do that in a pair of shorts. I mean, that water, even in the dead of summer, that water's pretty cold, right?
60 to 65 typically.
And in the dead of winter, if I can't imagine how cold that water is, not to mention the outside temperature. So when you're doing it out of the typical warm weather season. So yeah, you're wearing a wetsuit or a dry suit?
Yep. Wetsuit, dry suit, definitely a dry top or a splash top. This water here behind us, that was, I want to say this last, I think it was last August. No, it's August 20, last August. It was last August. And the water was, I want to say 64 degrees that day. And the outside temperature was 98. So it's refreshing because you get really hot on the raft. Dunk your head in the river, or after this rapid right here, you kind of come out of it and just big old laughs and smiles, and you're just soaked to the bone. Everyone there was underwater a few seconds before that photo, literally underwater.
That's just crazy. Okay, so let's go through a typical day for the person like me who's never done this before. What's the typical day? I mean, what time do they have to get there? I imagine you guys run them through some kind of a prep course before they go, safety course, call it what you will. And so run us through your average day for the person that knows nothing about this like me.
So for a commercial whitewater rafting trip, you typically would call up anywhere from, a year to a couple days in advance, and you book your trip, and they give you the meeting location and the meeting time. Now, us guys, we would get to the meeting location hours beforehand. We have a kind of a team meeting where we sit down and figure out, okay, who's going to be the people person, who's going to be the medical person, who's going to be the gear person, so that we all have designated jobs, so that we're in charge of make sure that everything's dialed in and set and ready before the guests arrive. We'll blow up boats. We'll put the gear into it, including water, throw bags, safety gear, lunch, any other gear that might be necessary to go. We'll make sure we have our paddles ready, our jackets ready, the light whitewater jackets. And then we're dialed and set a couple hours beforehand. Typically, I'll meet up at 7 a.m. The meet time for most rafting trips is somewhere between 9 and 11, depending on what's going on that day, how many trips are going on. So when the guests arrive, if I'm the people person, I'm introducing myself and I'm walking them over and saying, hey, we need to make sure you fill out the forms that are necessary. Unless you filled it out online, then have a seat over here. Once we get everybody there, we then start what's called a pre-river talk. And that's where we go through a whole list of the things that can occur on the river, how we're going to prepare for them, what we're going to do, what we're going to watch out for, kind of the safety procedures. It just verbalize all the issues for the day. Then we split up. We'll split the rafts into, our people into rafts, make sure that we keep bigger groups together. And then we'll get their jackets on. We'll get them fitted nice and snug. You need them nice and snug, because when you're in the water and your jacket's not snug, it comes up around your neck and it doesn't help. So we want to make sure it's nice and snug on you. We grab a paddle and then we'll head down to the rafts that are already in the water typically. I'll get them into the raft. I'll have them sit down. And that's when I kind of teach them some of the basics. I teach them how to hold a paddle. I teach them how the 5 basic paddle commands: forward, backwards, left turn, right turn. And the most important phrase for the day is stop. It's more often than not, if you just stop paddling and wait a second, you can figure out solutions of what you need to do next. So I'll work with them in the water, and then we'll all kind of signal to each other. Us guys will signal to each other that all is good. We're all good. And then we're heading out. Let's go. We're heading out. So we understand our boat order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then where you sit in that order. And we head down the river and we talk and just have a blast with the folks that are coming up and kind of teaching them. As for the length of the day, if we put on, say, at 11 a.m. on the South Fork of the American River, we're doing the lower section from the town of Lotus down to Salmon Falls, where Lake Folsom kind of begins.
Right.
Typically about a 5-hour day. You'll raft for a couple hours. We'll pull over at a ranch and have a lunch that we brought, typically sandwiches and snacks, meat, vegetarian foods, and fruit, more often than not fruit. We love putting out salsa with cream cheese in it. That's really good.
I've had that. I like that too.
It's really good. I never had it before there either. But we do that, make sure we clean up all the nets, leave it cleaner than when we got there. And then we sometimes at this one spot, we'll walk folks upriver a little bit, and there's this huge eddy. That's where water is flowing down. And if something gets in its way, it goes around it and then creates this eddy behind it. So water goes back upstream. So we take guests who are interested in doing this with their vests on, and we jump in the river and they float down. And then all of a sudden the river just takes them and circles them around a bunch and then takes them back upriver. And it blows them away to feel the power of the river like that. Because you just don't understand how much power a river has. When it's flowing, you're watching it. But when you're in it, you could feel it.
Right.
Your legs being dragged that way. But the river, if you stay in that lane, it takes you perfectly back upstream. It's so amazing. It's such a fun occurrence. We'll finish that. Then we head down and we see the Lollipop Tree, which if you've ever done the lower section of the South Fork, the gorge section, you look out for the Lollipop Tree, because when you see the Lollipop Tree, that's when you know the really fun whitewater rafting is coming up ahead. All the class 3s, all the class 3 pluses, all the fun whitewater that just gives those big smiles like the ones behind me.
Right. So now when you're rafting, it's not like, you're on a tour bus or something, you just kind of sit there and look around. You're working, right? Everybody has to work as a team, paddle when they need to paddle, and paddle, everybody needs to be coordinated and paying attention and doing their fair share, right?
They do. Oftentimes you'll have guests who aren't interested in paddling or not interested in participating. We had a law firm come in one time from the Bay Area, And I handed paddles to all of these individuals, newly minted lawyers. The company wanted them to do a team building trip, which is rafting is a phenomenal way to do team building. We've done a lot of corporate, we still do a lot of corporate team building trips on rafting because you learn quickly how effective one person not paddling has on the rest of the group. And so with this group, I'm handing out paddles. It's my first year. And one of the guests said, I'm not taking this. My company paid you to put me down the river and I'm doing it. I'm like, okay, I didn't know what to say. And so I just kept the paddle and kept it to myself and added it into the raft. And we're going down a river and we happened to be sideways and we came up next to this little rock sticking up out of the water and hit it. And the guest flew out of the raft and went into the water. Now we pulled up next to the guest and I grabbed the guest and pulled them back into the raft. And they were hooting and hollering and frustrated. Why was I the only one that went? And I said, you're the only one that didn't have a paddle. You were leaning back. You weren't leaning forward, like everyone else had their paddle ready to kind of dig in and be part of this. And after that, the guest asked for their paddle back. It was amazing. I mean, the team learned that we couldn't get certain angles. It was harder to make angles without that guest paddling. There's times where somebody's too powerful and they'll push a raft a certain way. And you've got to reconfigure how people are paddling in the back where they're sitting in the raft to make sure you get a really good consistency going down the river before you enter the big rapids. But more often than not, a good guide can work that out pretty effectively.
Yeah, I never thought about the team building aspect of it, but that's an absolute true story.
It's phenomenal. We love doing team building. We do it on the river, do it off the river, do team building during dinner when we're making dinner or lunch. There's a lot of really amazing things for the team building aspect of whitewater rafting.
Wow. Great idea for anybody that has a business that's watching this interview. I mean, what a great way to make sure that your employees work together as a team. That's an awesome.
It highlights it readily and easily. Oftentimes we work together as teams, but you can't really tell who's doing what or how it's doing. Here, it's if everybody's doing the same thing and we're all paddling forward hard, we'll get through the rapid without any issues typically. But if somebody's not paddling, and it often creates the raft to turn towards the danger rather than away from it.
Right.
And that's where that single or two people who aren't working hard can really mess up a group's effort. And it just, rafting highlights that immediately.
Right. So the South Fork that you typically raft on, that's about a 5-hour trip then. So
on the lower section, it's about 5 hours roughly. You put in at 11, you take out around 4:30. On the upper section of the South Fork, it's about a 4-hour trip, about a 9-mile section. Different rapids, different beauty. Just it's a fun river. It's one river, South Fork of the American River, but it's a lot of fun. Another river trip that if you've got a lot of extra energy and you comfortable with rafting would be the Middle Fork of the American. It's I want to say 17 miles if memory serves. Could be wrong on that. But it's got class 4s and class 5s, and it's phenomenal.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because even though I've never been whitewater rafting, I'm well aware of the fact that there's different class rivers. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
The higher the number, the nastier it is. Is that correct?
So as far as I was told, the rating comes from two things. My words, not theirs, the survivability of the rapid and the inherent dangers, basically, and the technical maneuvers that need to be done to get through the rapid.
Oh, okay.
I've been in rapids where I didn't make any calls. I just went into the rapid and went through it. Didn't make a call, didn't do anything. But had our raft turned sideways or got flipped over, what was ahead could have been very dangerous for those individuals. And let me give you an example. The Middle Fork of the American. There is a class 5 river called, good golly, Tunnel Chute. This was the river back in the late 1800s. The miners wanted to blast a hole through some large granite rock and then divert the river so they could mine the stream, this oxbow that the river used to go in on the Middle Fork. So they blew this hole through this big granite and a massive hole. So I think it's 110, maybe 100 yards long. Wow. And then before that, there's a chasm. It's a series of just rock chasms. And it's a pretty straightforward rapid, but it's really jagged because of the dynamite that happened so long ago. The river hasn't worn it down yet. So if you fall out there, you're more likely to get injured. But the maneuverability of the river is pretty basic. You just stay off the wall, stay away from the walls. So maneuverability, it's a 1, 2 maybe, but injury to individuals if they fall out is definitely a 5. So that's why it's rated a 5.
5 being the most dangerous.
The most treacherous, yeah. A class 6 is determined as an unrunnable waterfall. Niagara would be considered a class 6, and though we've seen through history people have gone over that, so it's urged that you don't go over class 6s.
Well, I imagine there's people out there that are saying it's a class 6. I'm going to do it. That's kind of the way people are. So not me, but I get it.
You know what? It's funny. I forgot to mention this. So I believe on the East Coast they rate their rivers 1 through 10.
Oh.
So what we would call a class 5, they call a class 10. Wow. What we would call a 4+, they call a 9.
Gotcha. So somebody like me that wants to go whitewater rafting for the first time, let's say I want to go July timeframe. I'm not quite ready for the December whitewater rafting yet, right? So how far ahead of time do I have to make the call up there to one of the rafting companies to get a reservation? I mean, is that something you got to do way out in front? You could do it the last minute? Or just how far out front do you have to be on getting those reservations?
You can make your reservation tomorrow. You can make your reservation typically a couple of days before the rafting day you want to do it. But when you wait that long, you may not have the ability to use that company because they may not have a guide available. They may not have a raft available, especially depending on the size of your rafting trip. If you've got 2 people, they'll usually fit you in. If you've got 20 people, you want to book a little earlier because that way you can secure 2 to 3 rafts that are just your 20 people. You're all dialed and you're set. If anybody has any food allergies or whatever, the rafting companies, they prepare a great lunch for everyone and they ask for any unique food occurrences so they can take care of that. They do as much as they can to accommodate the guests. So the earlier you call, the better off you'll be and the more set you'll be for sure.
And I would imagine a lot of people, if I were to do something like that, I'd say, okay, a full raft is 6 or whatever the number is. I'd go out and get 5 buddies so that you knew everybody on the raft. And I imagine a lot of people probably do that. They put together like a whole raft and book it, right?
It's a lot of fun to be out there with friends. Most of the trips I do now are private trips. I have my own raft, as I mentioned before, and I have all my own life vest and paddles and all the gear that's necessary. And I've taken buddies from the Capitol when I used to work there. I've taken friends from other jobs I've held. I've taken my family and I. Can I share a shot real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
Back in '97, that first year that I became a guide, I worked every day. And if I wasn't working, I would often jump on a river trip just to row a boat by myself or be out there to help other guys because I just loved being on the water. Well, on July 12th of that year, there was a group of reuniting college roommates from University of California, Santa Barbara. And these 5 young ladies were going down the river and I wanted to be their guide. I saw the trip notes a couple of weeks before the trip and I busted my butt with the company owner to say, hey, I want this trip. And he put me through all kinds of hemming and hawing and making me do extra jobs and stuff, but I got them done. And this rafting trip, we took the day off and had a great day on the river. We did a South Fork lower section, as I mentioned earlier. And that girl and I hit it off really well. Well, it turns out she and I hit it off so well that we started dating. And this was our 2nd year of rafting. This wasn't the first picture, but this was our 2nd year of rafting. And that turned into a few more dates and ended up doing such a great job with her. And I just had such an amazing time with her that I take my whole family whitewater rafting. That's me on the sticks right there. It's my bride, Kara, my son, Ethan, my other son, Jameson, and my other son, Grayson. And the 5 of us, we now go rafting every year. This is our 3rd year rafting as a family. And it's been such an amazing enjoyment to do that, knowing that I met her whitewater rafting. She was my guest.
Right.
And, it's such an amazing thing to be out there with my family. And I can't express how much I just love being on the water with them. It's fun to be out there with friends as well. I'd love to get you out there, Bill.
Yeah, well, hey, we're going to do that. We're going to do that. I would love to do that as well. Gary, how do you get these phenomenal pictures? I mean, do they have cameras set up along the river or what? I mean, some of those pictures they're obviously not selfies, right? So how are you getting them?
So there's a couple different rafting companies that work, rafting photo companies who work up there, and they stake themselves out at three typical rapids on the river. One is at Hospital Bar, which is what this photograph's at. People would come down there and they sit up on the rock, and you're looking right at them as you're coming through this massive rapid that you drop underwater in. Totally this wave covers you, and then you come up out of the everyone there, it's drenched. They just came up from underneath the water, but they'll get a series of anywhere from 15 to 20 30 photographs in a series. And more often than not, they'll have a kayaker from the company that comes down the river. They'll eddy out on the side of the river. They'll get the memory card from the photographer. They'll finish going down the river, jump into their car, drive back up to their business in the town of Lotus, upload the photos so that when you're done rafting, you'll drive back up into the town of Coloma, not Lotus. You'll drive back up into the town of Coloma and go look at these photographs. And more often than not, you purchase them because they're just great photos. They're fun. We've got every photo from our family trips blown up on the wall in a 20 by 30 setup. They're awesome pictures. Always awesome.
Yeah, that's cool stuff. And certainly you want to take some memories home with you. That's a great way to do it.
There was an outfit in Idaho, I think, and I know they used to do it in California. Rather than run the memory chips back, then when they actually shot rolls of film, they would have pigeons or some type of fairy bird attached to the roll of film, just the film to itself, not the hard plastic shell, and send it. And the pigeon would, or whatever bird would fly back to the company, and they would blow up the photos from there.
How cool is that? Yeah, that was the old technology. Yeah. Okay, so obviously you're going to get wet. You're going to get wet out there. So assuming that somebody's going during the summer season, what's the dress? I mean, do they just show up in their shorts and a tank top? Or I mean, what should they show up in? What should they bring with them?
So we asked people not to bring towels on the raft. We asked them if they want to bring a towel, put it in your car, leave it there. We encourage people to bring sunglasses because it's bright out there. We encourage those to bring croquis or something that holds your sunglasses onto your head a little bit. A hat is helpful because of the sun. You'll get a lot of sun on your face that day. We encourage board shorts. It gives you a little more traction with your butt on the metallicized rubber. We'll tell people if they tend to get cold to grab kind of a non-cotton long sleeve shirt. Just keep some of the sun off them and keep a little bit of the chill. Tennis shoes are welcomed on your feet, or strap down kind of not flip-flops, obviously, but sandals, something that's firm on your foot.
Right.
But those are the most typical things. You don't really need a lot. You don't need much other than the vest and the paddle. You don't really need anything else. I've seen people wear all kinds of get up out there, but board shorts, long sleeve shirt usually works really well. Long sleeve non-cotton shirt works really well.
Pair of sunglasses, a hat, and some tight fitting tinnies of some type, right?
I'm not wearing a hat in this one because literally the rapid before this, I fell out of the raft and my hat went bailing down the river. We actually found my hat about a mile down past this photograph. One of the guest rooms was, "Hey, Gary, your hat." She pulls it up out of the river and hands it to me. So it was one of those funny moments.
I can imagine you guys lose a lot of hats out there.
Hats, sunglasses, GoPros. There's actually YouTube guys who go out and snorkel or scuba dive in the river, and they pick up so many things. There's so many YouTube. They're on TikTok, I think. They're on Instagram. They're on YouTube, and they highlight all these things. My brother-in-law, he goes up there all the time and finds sunglasses, wallets, GoPros, phones, so much stuff.
That's one thing that I do is scuba dive. No, I've never done that on a whitewater river like that. But yeah, it is amazing when you go even the slow float, the beer drinking type, rivers that a lot of people do, right?
We're down there.
You dive down, you find money, you find this, you find that, a lot of cell phones, like you say, sunglasses. It's just amazing the stuff that you can find for sure. Yeah. Gary, what about somebody that may be either elderly or has some kind of a special need, some type of a disability, can they also participate in whitewater rafting?
It's dependent upon each company and their willingness to work with the customer. I've heard that I've heard that folks who have zero motor ability, they're fully wheelchair confined, that they've set up a chair in a raft in a way that they could stay in it safely. There have been groups of blind individuals who've gone rafting, deaf individuals. There's a lot of opportunity out there, but again, you just have to call up the rafting company and see what they can work out with the unique guides that they have. There are some guides who are just really good at that, and they know how to handle the situations, make it really fun for everybody involved. So yes, it is available. You just have to have a lot of communication with the rafting companies.
Well, that's good news for people that may have been thought, I could never do this. Maybe they can. So like you say, reach out and ask a few questions, and maybe they can find somebody that can fully accommodate them safely on the river.
So I'm going to share that picture again to kind of give you an idea. So as I said, this is my bride and I rafting. Notice she doesn't have a paddle. She could have literally brought a lawn chair and sat right there in the middle and done nothing all day long, while I, on the oars, did everything all day. Wow. There are many trips where you'll take individuals down who just don't have the arm strength, or maybe don't have, or maybe something wrong with their back, and it's hard for them to do a lot of that paddling. We can accommodate that for sure.
I'm telling you, Gary, that must be a workout, especially if you're doing it all on your own. That's like going to the gym for 5 hours, right?
It's a lot of energy, and my shoulders and arms got really
buffed.
Yeah, I did. It worked for me when I met Kara that first time on July 12th, 1997. Right. She thought I was really buff, and that was really nice.
It certainly didn't hurt, I'm sure. Oh, okay, so we talked about people that may have special needs or disability being able to participate in this sport as well. What is like the cutoff for somebody that's too young to be out on the river?
The company that I usually work for, All Outdoors, I believe it's still set at 8. They don't like to take people under the age of 8, primarily because of size. You need to be able to fit into a certified life vest for whitewater rafting. You need to be able to fit into it snugly. And the smallest vests that they make for kids for that type of rafting typically is between 7 and 8. I mean, I've seen kids out there that were 6 that were just big kids. I've seen kids out there that were 11 that could barely fit in a smallest vest possible. So a lot of it's more size than age, but they try to keep it around 8 if possible.
Uh-huh. That's good information as well. Gary, a little earlier, we talked about how well whitewater rafting lends itself to corporate team building, if you will. But what other types of groups, should give thought to going on a whitewater rafting trip?
There's so many different types of groups that would have just a blast out on the water. Two that really easily come to mind are bachelor and bachelorette parties, family get-togethers. If somebody's coming in from out of town, they come in from, Iowa or Texas, and you take them up rafting for the day. Co-workers. One of the things that I love doing as a whitewater lobbyist, a water lobbyist, is taking legislative members and legislative staffers out whitewater rafting, and they love it. They just have a blast on the water, and it's a way to discuss the multiple benefits of water that we all utilize water for. So it's there is no group that wouldn't love being out there. I mean, you can even go as an individual if you so desire, just to be on the water.
So as far as the group size, if you will, if you want to gather family, friends, bachelor party, whatever it may be together, on the California rivers that you typically run, the typical group size caps out at what, maybe 5 to 7, somewhere in there?
That sounds about right for most companies. Some companies run some larger rafts. Some companies run smaller rafts. But again, these are all California based. Like if you jumped on the Colorado River, you're looking at rafts or dories that could hold anywhere from 8 to 28. Sometimes some of those rafts have motors on them. Wow. Rafting on the Colorado River, I haven't done it yet, but it's much different than rafting here on the whitewater in California. It's much smaller groups, but I think it's more personalized, more intimate when you got 6 to 8 people on there. And it's a good time. You get to know everyone on the raft. You're telling jokes, having fun, jumping off the boat. There's just so much fun you have out there.
What's the cost? I mean, what should somebody expect to spend to either book a raft, or maybe you just want to book yourself, or what's the typical cost to run a river in California?
The company that I usually work for, All Outdoors, they have a fast trip that has no lunch. It's just rafting, and you're done in typically 3 hours. And those run, I want to say, between $60 and $90 per person, if memory serves. They may have deals on that from time to time. There's the normal rafting trip that includes lunch, and that's anywhere from 90 to 120. Mm-hmm. And then they have overnight trips where you do the entire South Fork of the American River, and they make you lunch, dinner, breakfast, and I believe lunch the next day. And those run somewhere between 180 and 240, if memory serves, per person.
So on the overnight trip, so they pull off somewhere and you camp somewhere along the way, right?
Yeah, it depends on the river. Sometimes it's camping in a designated campground. Sometimes you're river camping, where you just set your tent up wherever there's a spot, and we'll set up the dinner area. We'll set up oftentimes when there's no fire season going on, when we're doing I'm talking Middle Fork of the American River here, overnight camping. It's all river camping. There's no designated campsite. It's the side of the river where there's a sandbar.
That's good stuff. It sounds like there's really something for everybody out there, that whether they're looking for a short trip, a long trip, an overnight trip, or whatever. I mean, there's companies out there that will provide exactly what you need.
Yeah, the company I work for, they do a trip called I think it's called Tom Sawyer trip, where it's a designated trip for little kids. And they don't do the serious whitewater, but they do the lighter whitewater, like class 1s and 2s. And they set the raft up so that kids are just bouncing around having a blast. It's somebody rowing, so the kids don't have a paddle. And they get to a spot where they flip the raft over and then angle it, kind of drop it down, and then bring a bucket and pour water on the top of the raft. And the kid jumps up there, and the kid slides down the raft and launches into the water.
Okay, how fun is that? There truly is something for everybody out there on that river. That's just absolutely amazing. Well, Gary, how do they get a hold of your company if they're interested in a whitewater rafting trip?
As I mentioned before, there's a lot of whitewater rafting companies out there, and there's, it depends on what you're looking for. Are you looking for the most safest? You're looking for the cheapest, the closest? I mean, it just depends on what you're kind of looking for.
So there's a lot of options out there. You just kind of get online and figure out what you want, make a few phone calls, and get it booked.
Yeah, look, I'd encourage looking at their Instagrams too, because I think a lot of them put really amazing photos that give you an idealized view of what can happen out on the river.
Well, Gary, I guess as a rookie, if you will, on whitewater rafting, I learned a ton today. So I appreciate you taking the time with me, and I know our viewers will as well. I'm ready to get out there with you, so I'm not going to let you off the hook on that. We'll talk about that. But nevertheless, thank you for your time today. Very, very informative to me. And I know it'll be very, very informative to a lot of people out there that have always probably been curious about whitewater rafting, but like me, have never done it. So yeah. I think you're going to see some new faces out on the river this coming summer. So I'm looking forward to being one of those new faces.
I look forward to that day, Bill, and we'll get you up there, and it'll be a great photograph, and you will love that photograph the rest of your life, because it's just so much fun, so intense. It's peaceful. There's wildlife everywhere up there. Ducks and geese are on the river,
right.
Fawns,
right.
All kinds of reptiles, and it's amazing. I mean, you know me, I'm a wildlife guy. I love working on habitat work, and love doing water policy that benefits the wildlife here in the Great Central Valley of California. And rafting is just one of those other multiple benefits that the state's water provides for its citizens.
Sure does. Well, Gary, thank you so much for your time today. Very much appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you out on the water. So.
Hopefully this snowpack continues to build, and we'll have one heck of an amazing whitewater year coming up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you to our viewers for tuning in today to The Outdoor View, the place where we educate, connect, and learn to protect our outdoor traditions. Check us out at www.theoutdoorview and on our Facebook page.